The morning settled quietly over the outskirts of Wellington Hills, a forgotten town tucked between faded cornfields and dusty roads somewhere in central Texas. The sun hung low, casting golden streaks across the cracked earth. A soft breeze rustled the tall grass, whispering a kind of mourning only silence could carry. On a lonely dirt road, Lennon Hayes, a 69-year-old widower and retired carpenter, spotted something barely moving along the shoulder. A figure, thin, trembling, smeared in mud and dried blood, was dragging itself toward the sound of his old pickup's engine. It was a German shepherd, and her eyes spoke a quiet desperation no words could match. Lennon stopped the truck without thinking. Slowly, he stepped out, his boots crunching against the gravel. His breath caught when he met the dog's gaze. Those eyes were haunted, but alive. For a man who had lived in silence since his wife passed 6 years ago, the connection struck something raw inside him. The shepherd, ribs showing, paws scraped, leaned forward with what little strength she had and collapsed gently at his feet, like she had been waiting for him all along. Kneeling down, Lennon touched her head, his calloused hands careful, reverent. Her fur was coarse and patchy, caked with filth, but the soul inside her had not yet given up. He hadn't cried since the funeral, not once. But something about this creature, broken but brave, cracked the dam. A single tear ran down his cheek as he whispered, "You're safe now." It wasn't just to her. It was to the loneliness that had made a home inside him. In the back of the truck, an old quilt, the one his wife had sewn, became the shepherd's bed. He drove with one eye on the rearview mirror, watching her chest rise and fall, afraid that even this small mercy might come too late. She didn't sleep. She just watched him, never blinking, as if memorizing his face in case it was the last one she'd ever see. Back at the weathered house on Frost Hollow Road, Lennon gently carried her inside. The place had grown cold and quiet over the years, filled more with dust than laughter. But as he laid her on the floor near the fireplace, something strange happened. The dog, still weak, barely breathing, lifted her head and stared down the hall, not in fear, in recognition, as if she'd been here before. And in that moment, Lennon felt a chill run down his spine. Not from fear, but from a memory he didn't yet know he had. Lennon spent the rest of the day sitting on the worn recliner across from the fireplace, where the shepherd lay curled up on the old rug. He hadn't lit a fire in months. It felt pointless without Linda around. But tonight, the silence was different. It wasn't heavy. It was watchful. The dog hadn't moved much since he carried her in, but her eyes followed him constantly. Curious, cautious, patient. There was a calm intelligence in her gaze, the kind that made him feel like she understood more than she let on. He got up slowly, knees creaking, and lit the fireplace. As the flames grew, so did something else, comfort, or maybe connection. The warmth settled into the room and the dog shifted slightly, her head resting on her front paws. That's when he saw it. A jagged scar just above her right shoulder, partly hidden by the fur. It wasn't fresh, but it had healed badly, as if someone had patched her up without care. Lennon reached for a towel soaked in warm water and slowly crouched beside her. She tensed at first, her body stiffening, but she didn't move away. Gently, he wiped the dirt from her fur, whispering words he hadn't used in years. "You've been through hell, haven't you, girl?" As he cleaned her, something inside him stirred. Memories of the past, of when he and Linda had taken in a stray collie during a snowstorm back in '84. That dog, Daisy, had lived with them for nearly a decade. He hadn't realized until now how much he missed being needed. He paused, looking into the shepherd's tired eyes. "You need a name," he murmured. "Can't just keep calling you girl." He thought for a moment. Then it came to him. Hope felt right, like a breath held too long, finally released. "Hope," he repeated, and for the first time, the shepherd's tail moved, just slightly, against the floor. Later that night, as the fire crackled and the wind tapped against the windows, Lennon stared at an old photo on the mantel. Him, Linda, and Claire, their daughter, taken at a 4th of July picnic years ago. Claire hadn't visited in nearly 8 months. Too busy, too distant. He wondered what she'd think if she saw him now, talking to a half-dead dog like it was a person. But Hope wasn't just any dog. There was something unfinished about her, something lost or hidden. Before heading to bed, Lennon placed a shallow bowl of water near Hope, along with some leftover chicken. She sniffed it weakly but didn't eat. He didn't push. Trust took time. As he turned off the lights and made his way down the hall, he glanced back one last time. Hope was still staring down the corridor, toward Linda's old studio, the one no one had entered since the funeral. That night, Lennon dreamt of a door creaking open and paws walking across wooden floors. But when he awoke, he couldn't tell if it was just a dream, or if someone or something had moved. The morning sun crept slowly across the hardwood floor, warming the edges of the rug where Hope lay sleeping. Lennon was already up, moving about the kitchen with a quiet focus. He hadn't slept well. The dream, or whatever it had been, still lingered in his mind, like the smell of smoke after a fire. He poured coffee into a chipped mug and glanced toward the hallway. Hope hadn't moved all night, but she had stirred at dawn, shifting her weight with a low, aching groan. There was strength returning to her, little by little. But there was something else in her eyes this morning, something haunted. By mid-morning, Lennon had made a decision. If Hope had truly belonged to someone, if there was even a chance she had been lost and not just abandoned, then he owed it to her to find out. He gently loaded her into the back of his truck again, wrapping her in the same blue quilt. The drive into Ellis County was slow, but the weather was kind, and Hope rested her head on the side, watching the passing fields with that same quiet, knowing gaze. Lennon caught her eye in the mirror once or twice, and every time, it felt like she was trying to tell him something. The vet clinic was small, tucked between a bait shop and an old laundromat, but Dr. Reese Harlow had been there for decades. She remembered Lennon from years ago, when he brought in his collie for arthritis treatment. Now, her eyes widened when she saw the state Hope was in. "She's been through something serious," Reese murmured, running a gloved hand gently over the dog's scarred back. "But she's lucky. She found you." Lennon didn't respond. He watched as Reese took out a small scanner and waved it slowly over Hope's shoulder. A faint beep broke the silence. "She's chipped," Reese said, surprised. "Give me a minute. I'll pull the registration." She stepped away to her desk, typing carefully. Lennon stood still, hands in his pockets, heart pounding harder than he'd expected. He told himself it was nothing, just a formality. But deep down, he was afraid. Afraid that finding out who Hope belonged to might mean losing her. When Reese returned, there was a crease between her eyebrows. The chips registered to someone named Blair Hollow. Address is over in Phoenix Lane, about 40 miles north of here. Lennon felt his throat tighten. The name meant nothing to him, but there was a strange coldness in the way Reese said it. "You know her?" he asked. Reese hesitated. "Not well, but I've heard things." She didn't elaborate, just handed him the printed record and said softly, "Be careful, Lennon." On the drive home, Hope rested her head on his arm. She didn't know what had been discovered, but somehow, her eyes looked heavier, as if she could feel that the past was waking up, and it was coming for both of them. The road to Phoenix Lane was long and winding, flanked by dead trees and weathered fences that seemed to whisper stories no one had time to listen to. Lennon gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, his knuckles pale against the cracked leather. Hope sat quietly in the passenger seat, her head low but eyes alert. The printed paper with the name Blair Hollow sat folded in the glove compartment, like a question burning a hole through the dashboard. He hadn't told anyone where he was going. Not even Reese Harlow, who had warned him with a look that said more than words ever could. Phoenix Lane wasn't a town so much as a scattered collection of houses, some boarded up, others barely standing. It felt like a place forgotten by the world. Lennon slowed as he passed a faded mailbox with the name Hollow painted in peeling white letters. The house behind it sagged under its own weight. Weeds choked the yard. Curtains were drawn. A metal swing moved slowly in the wind, creaking like something from an old nightmare. Hope's ears twitched, and a low, barely audible growl rumbled in her throat. She knew this place. Lennon parked and stepped out cautiously, glancing around. The air was still, but it wasn't peaceful. It was tense, like the pause before a storm. He knocked on the door once. Nothing. Knocked again, louder. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a thin, pale woman in her late 50s with sunken eyes and a cigarette burning between two fingers. Blair Hollow. Her gaze fell immediately on the dog beside him. And for a second, just a second, something flickered in her expression. Recognition, guilt, maybe even fear. "Where did you find her?" she asked coldly. "In a ditch outside Wellington Hills," Lennon replied. "She was barely alive." Blair leaned against the doorframe. "Thought she was dead." The words hit Lennon like a slap. He stared at her, searching for any sign of affection, of remorse, of anything. "She has a name?" he asked. Blair shrugged. "Used to call her Shadow, but I don't suppose it matters now." Her tone was empty, detached. Hope moved closer to Lennon's leg, pressing into him as if to shield herself from something unspoken. Lennon felt something rising inside him. Anger, maybe, or just disbelief. "You chipped her. You had to care at some point." Blair laughed bitterly. "It was my ex-husband. Said she'd be useful for protection. She didn't turn out the way he wanted." She paused. "He's gone now." The way she said it, gone, left room for interpretation, and Lennon didn't dare ask. Without another word, Blair closed the door. Lennon stood there for a long moment, hand resting on Hope's head. As they walked back to the truck, he whispered, "You didn't run away. You were thrown away." And this time, Hope didn't look back at the house. She simply climbed into the truck, like she knew that chapter, whatever it was, had finally been closed. The ride back from Phoenix Lane was quiet, but not in the comforting way it had been before. Lennon's thoughts swirled, thick and heavy, while Hope lay curled in the passenger seat, her eyes half closed but not asleep. She hadn't made a sound since they left Blair's house, but her body language had shifted, tense, withdrawn. Her tail stayed tucked tightly, and every time the truck hit a bump, she flinched, as if expecting pain. It wasn't just neglect Hope had suffered. Lennon felt it in his bones now. She had been hurt. Back at the house, he placed a bowl of warm broth by the fireplace and sat cross-legged next to her. Hope didn't eat immediately, but she licked his hand, a quiet acknowledgement. Lennon stared into the fire, the flames dancing against old memories. He couldn't stop thinking about Blair's coldness, the way she looked at Hope like a burden, not a life. He didn't understand how anyone could discard something so loyal, so deeply trusting. But maybe it wasn't about understanding. Maybe it was about facing something people like Blair spent their lives avoiding: guilt. That night, Lennon pulled an old cardboard box from the hallway closet. Inside were photos, letters, Linda's scarf, and a dusty camcorder. He hadn't touched it in years. Curiosity and grief guided his hands as he inserted the tape and pressed play. The screen flickered to life. A Christmas morning from 2006, laughter, wrapping paper, Claire opening gifts, Linda holding their old collie in her lap. For a moment, he let the warmth of the memory wash over him. But then he paused the tape and glanced at Hope. Her ears were perked, her eyes locked on the screen. He tilted the camcorder slightly toward her. "You remember something?" he whispered. Hope stood, slowly, and approached the screen. Her nose touched the edge of the TV. Then she sat, fixated. Lennon stared, trying to process what this meant. She wasn't reacting to the sound or motion. She was recognizing something. Someone. Could it be Linda? Could it be the voice? Her past, whatever it had been, was tangled with more than just abuse. There had been love once. Lennon felt it. Hope wasn't just reacting. She was mourning. The next morning, Camden Frost, an old friend from Lennon's church group, stopped by. After hearing about the visit to Phoenix Lane, Camden said something that made Lennon freeze. "You know who Blair Hollow used to be married to, right? Micah Storm. That guy had a rap sheet longer than a grocery list. Dogs, fights, illegal stuff." Lennon clenched his jaw. It all started to make a terrible kind of sense. Hope hadn't just been discarded. She'd survived something dark. And now Lennon couldn't shake the feeling that what had happened to her wasn't over. That night, the wind howled harder than usual against the windows of Lennon's house. Branches scraped the siding like fingernails, and the old boards in the walls creaked under their own memories. Lennon sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the printed page Camden had given him. Micah Storm, a name that carried the kind of weight only fear could carve. Assault, animal cruelty, illegal fighting, prison time. But no one knew where he was now. Released, missing, dead. The silence around his name was almost louder than the crimes themselves. Hope lay curled beside the bed, eyes wide open. She hadn't rested properly since they'd returned from Phoenix Lane. Her ears twitched at every noise. Every knock from the wind made her flinch. Lennon watched her breathing, shallow and fast, and he hated what that told him. Trauma didn't just fade. It haunted, and something inside Hope had been triggered again. Not by the house or even Blair, but by the past returning like a storm on the horizon. In the morning, he drove out to Jules Arden, the county clerk who had access to old police reports. They'd gone to high school together, and she owed him a favor or two. Jules pulled the file reluctantly. "You sure you want to see this?" she asked, her voice low. Storm was into some real sick stuff. Lennon nodded. The folder smelled like dust and rot. Inside were photographs, logs, confiscation reports. And there it was, Hope's face. Younger, stronger, but unmistakable. In one image, she stood behind a metal fence, eyes wide, ribs visible. Shadow. "He used her to train fighters," Jules said. "Not to fight, to get beaten, to teach aggression in the others. She was bait, Lennon." The words punched the air from his lungs. Hope wasn't just a survivor. She was a victim of sustained cruelty designed to break her spirit. But somehow she hadn't broken. She had run. She had crawled. She had found him. Lennon drove back in silence, the weight of the file heavy in the seat beside him. When he walked through the front door, Hope ran to him. Not with excitement, but with urgency. She barked, once, sharp and loud, then stared at the window. Lennon turned quickly, and his stomach dropped. A truck sat parked down the road, engine off, windows dark. It hadn't been there before. He stepped outside, the wind whipping his coat, heart pounding. The truck didn't move, didn't flash its lights, just sat like a shadow waiting for the right moment to step forward. Hope stood at the doorway, growling now, low and deep, and Lennon finally understood. Micah Storm wasn't just a ghost from the past. He was back, and he was watching. Lennon barely slept that night. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind felt like a warning. He kept the porch light on and his shotgun, untouched since Linda passed, propped beside the door. Hope paced the hallway in restless circles, her instincts on edge. She didn't bark again, but the low growl never left her throat. It was the kind of tension Lennon hadn't felt since his days in the service. But this was different. This was personal. Someone out there had hurt her, and now he knew exactly who. By morning, the truck was gone. No tracks in the gravel, no note, no trace. But Lennon knew better. Micah Storm wasn't just passing through. He had found Hope, and maybe he wanted her back. Not for love, but out of control. People like him didn't forget what they considered theirs. Lennon's jaw tightened as he stared out the window. "You're not getting her," he muttered to no one. "Not again." He made a decision before breakfast. They couldn't stay at the house. Not until he figured out if Micah was truly nearby. He called Dakota Wren, a friend of Linda's and former sheriff who now ran a small cabin rental near the edge of the county. Dakota didn't ask questions. "Come," she said. "I've got space. Bring the dog." Lennon packed quickly, food, blankets, the vet file, the photo of Linda. Hope climbed into the truck without hesitation, her eyes scanning the road as they drove. The cabin was hidden behind tall pines and far from the main highway, a place no one would find unless they were looking hard. As the fire crackled in the stone fireplace, Hope finally seemed to exhale. She curled on the rug and, for the first time in days, slept deeply. Lennon stood by the window, watching the dirt road, heart heavy. He knew this was just a pause, a breath before something bigger. But he needed it, they needed it. And for the first time, he wondered, how far was he willing to go to keep her safe? That evening, a phone call came. Ellis Rowan, the deputy over in Phoenix Lane, had seen Micah Storm near an old barn property that used to be in Blair Hollow's family. "We didn't have enough to hold him," Ellis said, regret in his voice. "But if he's around again, we'll bring him in. You be careful, Lennon. That man has nothing left to lose." Lennon thanked him, though the words didn't offer much comfort. Outside, the wind had calmed, but a different kind of storm was building inside Lennon. He looked at Hope, sleeping, peaceful for now, and clenched his fists. He'd lost Linda. He'd nearly lost himself. He wasn't about to lose her. And somewhere in the dark, Micah Storm was still waiting. The cabin felt colder that night, even with the fire burning strong. Lennon couldn't shake the sense that time was running out. Every rustle outside made his heart skip. Hope lay at his feet, her ears perked and alert despite her exhaustion. She didn't sleep. Not fully. Not anymore. Her instincts were alive, tuned to the presence of something she couldn't see, but remembered. And Lennon? He felt it too. That Micah Storm was getting closer. That the past wasn't done with either of them. At 3:12 a.m., the sound came. A twig snapping outside. Then silence. Lennon rose slowly, shotgun in hand, stepping toward the window. The moonlight cast faint shadows through the trees. Nothing moved, but his gut told him the truth. Someone was out there. He walked to the back door, careful not to make a sound, and opened it just enough to see the porch. There, in the dirt, were footprints. Fresh, heavy. They hadn't been there before, and they led around the side of the cabin, toward Hope's window. He turned and found her standing now, eyes locked on him. She didn't bark. She didn't need to. Her look said enough, he's here. Lennon's hands shook, not from fear, but from fury. This man had hurt an innocent soul, and now he was trying to finish what he started. Lennon placed a hand on Hope's head. "You're not alone this time," he whispered. As the sun rose, the footprints had vanished into the woods, but the threat lingered in the air like smoke. Later that morning, Dakota Wren stopped by with coffee and a handgun, just in case. "Micah's smart," she warned. "He watches first, waits for weakness." Lennon didn't say much. He didn't have to. The lines on his face were carved deeper now. He was ready. If Micah came back, he wouldn't just be facing an old man and a broken dog. He'd be facing something stronger. A bond formed in pain, but rebuilt in love. That afternoon, Lennon found something in Hope's blanket. A small, frayed piece of leather, part of an old collar. Etched into it, nearly worn away, was the faint outline of a name. Not Shadow, not Hope. It read Jules. Lennon stared at it for a long time, heart pounding. "That was your name?" he asked softly. Hope looked up, and for the first time, there was peace in her eyes. A piece of her story had returned. A piece Micah had tried to erase. But the moment didn't last. That night, as the cabin settled into silence, the lights flickered once. Then came a knock at the door. Not hurried, not loud, just deliberate. And Hope began to growl. Not from fear, but from memory. The knock echoed through the cabin like a countdown. Lennon didn't move at first. He stared at the door, breathing slow, steady, like he used to before stepping into a firefight. Hope stood beside him now, her growl low and unwavering. The air was thick, heavy with memory, dread, and something else. Resolve. Lennon reached for the shotgun, his hands no longer trembling. He stepped toward the door, then stopped. Another knock. Same rhythm, same patience. The man on the other side wasn't in a rush. He opened the door slowly. There he was, Micah Storm, taller than Lennon remembered from the file photo, with a face that looked like it had lost more fights than it had won. His eyes were dead. but his mouth curled into something close to a smile. "Didn't expect you to answer," Micah muttered. "Thought maybe the dog would." Hope stood in the doorway beside Lennon, silent but unshaken. Her stare locked with Micah's. Something ancient passed between them, pain, recognition, defiance. "You've got something that belongs to me," Micah said. Lennon didn't blink. "She doesn't belong to anyone. Not anymore." Micah laughed under his breath. "You think she's healed? You think that dog can forget what she is?" His voice dripped with poison. "She's broken. Always was." Lennon stepped forward, eyes burning. "No, she was betrayed. And now she's free." He could feel Hope inch closer to him, her shoulder brushing his leg. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Micah's expression changed, barely, but enough. He took one step forward. "Move," he said, "or I'll take her." That's when Lennon raised the shotgun. "Try." For a second, neither man moved. The world seemed to narrow into that moment. Just them, the trees, and the weight of every decision that brought them here. Then, unexpectedly, Hope stepped between them. She didn't growl. She didn't bark. She simply stood there, staring at Micah, unflinching, and Micah stepped back. For the first time, there was something in his eyes that Lennon hadn't expected. Fear. Real fear. Because Hope wasn't just a victim anymore. She wasn't the bait. She wasn't the target. She was the witness, the survivor, and Micah saw it. He knew he couldn't control her again. "You're making a mistake," he spat. Lennon didn't respond. Neither did Hope. Micah turned, walked back toward the woods, and disappeared into the shadows that once owned her. But not anymore. That night, Lennon didn't sleep out of fear. He stayed awake out of relief, because the worst had come, and it hadn't broken them. A week had passed since Micah's storm vanished into the woods, and Lennon hadn't seen the truck again. No new footprints, no more knocks, just silence, but now it was the good kind. The kind that wrapped around a man like a blanket instead of a noose. Hope had changed too. She no longer slept with one eye open, no longer flinched at every sound. She walked freely around the cabin, even venturing to the edge of the woods with her tail high and steady. She wasn't watching for danger anymore. She was exploring a world that was finally hers. Lennon sat on the porch that morning, coffee in hand, while Hope lay beside him, her head resting on his boot. The sun filtered through the pines, and for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about what had been lost. He was thinking about what had been found. Love in the shape of a broken animal that refused to give up. Family not bound by blood but by choice. And purpose, something he thought had died with Linda. But Hope had lit that fire again. Later that day, Claire, his daughter, pulled into the driveway. He hadn't expected her. She stepped out slowly, her eyes scanning the land before they fell on the dog beside him. "Is that her?" she asked gently. Lennon nodded. "Her name's Hope." Claire crouched down, holding out a cautious hand. Hope looked at her, then at Lennon, and in a moment of pure grace, walked over and pressed her nose into Claire's palm. No fear, no hesitation, just acceptance. Inside, Claire looked around the cabin. "You've changed," she said. Lennon smiled faintly. "She changed me." And in that small space between father and daughter, a wall began to crumble. They talked for hours, about Linda, about memories, about pain, and the strange, beautiful ways healing finds its way in. By nightfall, the cabin didn't feel like a hiding place anymore. It felt like a home again. The next morning, Lennon took Hope back to Wellington Hills. Back to the house he once thought was too empty to matter. But now it felt alive. He opened the door, and Hope ran ahead, tail wagging, stopping only at the doorway to Linda's old studio. She looked back at him, waiting. He stepped in, dust dancing in the light. "She would have loved you," he whispered. Hope barked once, quiet and bright, as if she already knew. Outside, the wind blew softly. No more shadows, no more ghosts, just a man, a dog, and the quiet strength of starting over. Together,